Was this really a DEA hire? Do we really hire the most qualified people? I'm against discriminating men. I'm against maligning men. Hello and welcome back to a new video in my sub-series of videos, which I call 1 Week After. And why do I do this? Now, I talk about a lot of different things, call them PCM, politics, culture, metaphysics, and this is why we're called Magic Male, because I'm very interested in all magic things, and I spell it with a CK. Most of my videos are directly addressing things like masculinity, your issues with women, why it works, what does, what doesn't, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But I'm also occasionally picking up on current issues, current events of some kind. And I'm always trying to, there's always a point to this. I'm not a political pundit. I'm not a political commentator. There's much better people than me out there. I'm also not a journalist. I'm not an original researcher. My approach is I take a lot of stuff that other people have already done the research on, and then I look at it, and I typically wait a week, at least 72 hours. But it takes me a few days to really think this through, to really get deep with it. And today's video is about something, a tragedy, that at the recording of this video happened about a week ago. I'm talking about that totally avoidable and really tragic crash between a UH-60, commonly known as a Blackhawk helicopter, Army helicopter, and a civilian flight, a commuter plane. And that tragedy resulted in the death of 67 people. Now, a lot of people jump to conclusions about this. And my point here is not so much just to assign the blame or get into the details of what happened and what didn't happen, but my point is a different one. My point is always making a connection to your own issues with these events. What does it mean for you? What is the takeaway from this? What are the conclusions we can come to without jumping to conclusions? These videos are not deep dives. What I do is typically, most people just talk without engaging their brains. And while I may not be the brightest guy out there, never claimed to be, I'm just another cat walking through life, my approach is always, I have to think about stuff. I can be really extroverted on stage, but I'm actually more of an introverted, a deep thinker. I look at stuff, I let it simmer. What this video is really about, ultimately, is about you and how this affects you in your life and what you can do about these things. And we're all about helping men just like you to better your life. What I call emotional liberation, but I also call it, embracing your masculinity. I'm not a masculinist. That would be the opposite of a feminist. And what feminists do, and what I criticize about feminists, they always assign all the blame to men. They said, well, I was with a narcissist, fill in the blank, psychopath, blah, 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 a bad dude. And it's all his fault. And I'm so messed up, it's all men's fault. And I don't need to work on myself, In a 2004 study, I believe it was, women were asked, they surveyed a few hundred women, polled them, and said, what do you do for therapy? Well, I go to my therapist, and she really encourages me for being a woman. But all else failing, I just go shopping with my husband's credit card. That's not therapy. That's self-medication. You could be, it's just another form of numbing yourself. It's another form of skirting the issue. This video is about something else, but it is all about you in many ways, and we'll get to that. Let me just gather some of the facts here and see what this is really about. And for that, we should start at what happened. What happened was on January 29th, I believe it was, at night, relatively late in the evening, there was a commuter jet with something like 64 people on board, mostly, I guess, figure skater and their coaches and so forth. They were coaches themselves. They flew into one of the world's busiest airports, Ronald Reagan Airport, and it's right there on the Potomac River. Now, this plane, as it descended on a regular scheduled flight, and it was pretty low, like around 300 feet, in the final approach onto a certain runway with air traffic control directed it to go. Unbeknownst to them, there was also an Army helicopter, a UH-60, commonly referred to as a Blackhawk. And I've been on those. I'm not a pilot, but I've flown in them. Those are very loud, very uncomfortable, but also rather maneuverable pieces of equipment. Now, that particular Army Blackhawk was basically tracing the Potomac River as it's meandering through Washington. It was a little erratically, apparently, a little all over the place. And it was also at the wrong altitude. What happened? And what we're also going to talk about, this video is about something else. There's a thesis out there about DEI hires. Now, what is DEI? It's an acronym where an abbreviation for diversity, equality, and inclusion, or inclusivity. Basically, the old affirmative action from the 70s, hiring people not on their merit, at least not primarily, maybe even skipping a few of the critical criteria for merit or qualification in favor of, oh, you're some kind of minority, and there's a quota system associated with it. It could be the color of your skin, it could be your sex, and excuse me, it's not gender. Gender is a linguistic construct. You can have literally 67 genders because it's a construct, it's linguistics, it's semantic, whereas there's only two sexes, and that's the male and the female sex. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So a lot of people say DEI means die. And when it comes to critical things like piloting a very sophisticated, very powerful military helicopter such as UH-60, aka Blackhawk, you want to have the best possible pilot, the best possible people out there. Typically, the ones that I know have flown combat mission in Iraq. I even know some that were back in Vietnam. Well, of course, the Blackhawk doesn't date back to that. That was the old Huey, the Bell 212, which you may know from The Matrix. And unfortunately, you can't just download this. You see this elegant woman, Trinity, in The Matrix, a 25-year-old film too. And she says, give me the instructions, download the instructions for flying a B-212 helicopter. That's a Huey. That's the ones you see in Flight of the Valkyrie in Apocalypse Now when they go surfing, while bombing the bleep out of a few Vietnamese villages. Anyway, so that's not that helicopter. It's a very sophisticated piece of equipment. You really got to know what you're doing. And the people I've flown with in the 80s, 90s, in those damn things, Blackhawks and others, those people were typically very seasoned male, mostly white, sometimes Hispanic, pilots that had thousands of hours under their belt. Now let's look at who piloted this thing. These people have seen combat, they've been shot at. I've actually been in the Blackhawk while being fired upon with .50 caliber, and that could have easily brought it down. Lucky for me, if they would have been successful, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So do I know what I'm talking about? Yes and no. I've been in them and I know what it feels like. It's a scary experience. And part of that scary thing is that typically you're down at treetop level or you're down at, well, lower than a 10-story building, which is already, 100 feet. 200 feet would have been the proper altitude. This aircraft was not. The other aircraft, that jet and its final approach was, and it was properly directed by everybody blames the ATC, air traffic controller, and it is possible that one of the air traffic controllers left early, leaving this gentleman, who was very cool, calm, and collected, very qualified, very experienced, in my humble opinion, or at least that's what I'm gleaning from all the data that I've talked to, people I've talked to and so forth, that I've researched. This guy had to direct 2 planes, possibly even 3. Because with 2 jets, not just one. And no, it's not a conspiracy theory. There was just one jet. That was the American Airlines 5342. And then there was another one, 3,000 something or other. And it is not clear at this point if the pilot of that Blackhawk actually was talking about or looking at the same plane that the air traffic controller was talking to her. Who was this pilot? A lot of people had a nasty knee-jerk reflex when Trump just blurted out, and like Trump or hate Trump, but sometimes, he seems to talk before he fully engages his brains. Again, I voted for the man, but not with the same enthusiasm I voted for him in 2020 or 2016. Back then I was like, yeah, Trump, go. Now I'm like, I'm voting for you just because I hate the other guys more. But wherever you stand politically, I don't care. It's not important to me. I'm not a Republican, I'm not a Democrat, I'm a Ron Paul libertarian, if you will. I just look at stuff very pragmatically. Does it work? Does it not work? Are we going to piss off the whole world? Are we doing the right things? Are we making America better or worse? That's the only thing I care about. And that includes U.S. military armed forces, whom I have a lot of respect for, although less so now than I had respect for them 20, 30 years ago. And that may have to do with DEI hires. Do we really hire the most qualified people? Okay, so what do we know about this pilot? Her name was withheld per request by the family. The Army withheld that name for 3 days and then disclosed it. And we're talking about a 28-year-old woman, Army military pilot. She flew at night in the military Blackhawk and crashed it into a passenger airplane, killing 67 people. So that's what we know, and they may or may not have tried to cover it up, at least partially. Now, what caused this? The media were screaming because Trump immediately just blurted out, it's because of DEI. We'll get to that. Maybe, maybe not. And they also blame Trump because of his hiring freeze. He stopped the hiring of new air traffic controllers, and they say, oh, there was a lack of qualified air traffic controllers because of Trump. Again, I'm not going to get into the facts of that, but what we do know, and what is indisputable fact, is the FAA has definitely been turning away very qualified people for years because we need more DEI hires. We need more quota. We can't just hire the most qualified guys because they might be heterosexual white males. And we can't have that. We need to get, the DEI hires in there. Name of the pilot was Rebecca Lobach, 20 years old, Army captain, in the Army since July 2019. And to be fair, she was in the top 20% of ROTC, nationwide Army ROTC. And I've been in Army ROTC, so I know that means something. The name was initially withheld, and then after 3 days, they disclosed the name. She was, her unit was the 12th Aviation Battalion, but she also served as a White House social aide in the Biden administration. Eventually, she became a full-time pilot, but she had no combat experience, no deployments abroad or elsewhere. She was also apparently a certified sexual harassment / assault response and prevention victim advocate. SHARP is the acronym for it, Sexual Harassment, Assault Response and Prevention Victim Advocate, and wanted to become a physician after the Army. And she wasn't without any awards, merited or not. She had the Army Commendation Medal, the Army Achievement Medal, the National Defense Service Medal, and the Army Service Ribbon. Now, make no mistake, while these nice things, they're not combat decorations, and they're nothing like, say, the Purple Heart or the Silver Star or Forrest Gump or real heroes dragging, under fire dozens of their combats to safety. That's not what she was awarded this thing. They may or may not have been, and I'm not saying this was one way or the other, I'm just saying some of these awards are pretty much liberally handed out to anyone, just for, being politically correct, being a really good, knowing how to work this system. Now, I'm all for hiring the most qualified person for whatever job. And when it comes to jobs like this, such as pilots, particularly in one of the busiest areas of traffic in the world. Now, I personally don't think these Blackhawks should be training there, or there should just be fewer aircraft in the air at any given time. But, who am I to say? I mean, this is the very heart of America, political America anyway, Washington, D.C. There are some current suspicions about this pilot. Now, her social media accounts were wiped during the time of the initial investigation. Why? It causes more speculation. Now, I'm not implying anything necessarily, but I'm saying things that make you go, And apparently she was a very anti-Trump, strong Biden supporter, pro-LGBTQ. She was also a lesbian. Again, there's nothing right or wrong with being lesbian or any of that. The question is, was she the most qualified person for the job? And that's where I'm coming in. And that's where it relates to you. Was it a DEI hire? She was possibly an activist. It is assumed that she enjoyed preferential treatment by the Biden administration. And Trump somewhat called these facts out in the first conference, the first presser. Apparently he knew some stuff that, you or I may not have known, but that's what happened. Trump was blamed for the hiring freeze, but I don't think that immediately translated into a shortage of, the guy's only been in office for 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. I don't think that hiring freeze was that quickly consequential, if at all. And then he blurted out, as he tends to do, it's all because of DEI. DEI means die, the same letters, just in a different sequence. What happened? How did this accident happen? Well, the chopper was on a train-as-you-fight mission, apparently for emergency evac of VIPs from D.C. in case of, mostly a continuance of government kind of thing. And for this training, they or she was supposed to run a very predefined, established, and approved route with very specific coordinates and altitude parameters. However, she was clearly, again, you can fact check me, and I'm only taking the facts of other people. Am I 100% guaranteeing all these facts to be true or factual? No, I can't, because I'm not a researcher or a journalist. I don't work for the government. So she was apparently half a mile off course. These helicopters are supposed to maintain a 200-foot ceiling or lower, but she was supposed to be at 200 feet. She was at approximately 325 feet. Now, to be fair, the FAA sometimes kind of allows up to 75 feet in accuracy, but that's a detail. But she was definitely exceeding also, even on the worst of days, those 75 feet. She was well over 325 feet when she should have been at 200 feet when she crashed. She was apparently flying based on VFR, visual flight rules. That means you're looking at what you see as opposed to instrument flight. She may or may not have, we don't know, used NVG's night vision goggles. She might have gotten, if she was wearing those, she might have had tunnel vision or possible oversaturation in urban environment. If you've ever worked with night vision or thermal or any such thing, and as a scope or as goggles, whatever it is, it takes some getting used to. Okay, and the depth perception is even worse, and depth perception is already very difficult at night. So the communication with ATC at Reagan International Airport was, and her call sign was Papa Alpha Tango 25, or PAT, Blackhawk PAT 25. So Tower, PAT 25, traffic for runway 33, which is where this other plane was supposed to land. PAT 25, traffic in sight, request visual separation. Now, I'm not an expert on this. Like I said, I'm not a pilot on Play One on TV, but it's mostly, to totally oversimplified, it's mostly, do you see what the heck's going on? Can you see this airplane? Are you even tracking the right airplane? Do you know what you're doing? In other words. And then the tower approved said visual separation approved. Then after 30 seconds elapse, and then the tower receives a conflict alert warning. That's an automated, basically anti-collision system. And it told him, PAT 25, do you have CRJ in sight? And then repeat, pass behind CRJ, which is the other aircraft. Then she replied, PAT 25 has aircraft in sight, request visual separation approved. 10 seconds later, oh my God, crash, crash, crash. And to be perfectly fair to this air traffic controller, who's been much maligned and accused of, a lot of people say, it's clearly his fault. Maybe, maybe not. I personally beg to differ, but who am I to say? All I'm looking at is interpreting the facts, not the facts themselves so much. So to be fair, this guy, despite all that, I mean, he just saw this friggin' fireball, and he knew that no way anyone could have survived that. So he knew, dozens of people were just lost their lives in a big fiery crash. So he still had the presence and the cool, calm collectedness, which I personally find much more prevalent in men than in women. Just saying, it's my personal opinion, not a researched fact, but it's my opinion and my experience, and I've had quite a bit of experience with people under literal fire, staying cool, calm, and collected. I've worked with tier 2 operators, not that I am one, but I've worked with them. I know them, and I know how cool, calm, and collected they tend to stay. This air traffic controller had the presence of mind to still direct the plane behind them, the other one that may have or may not have been confused with the crash flight, and directed them safely to a landing on the runway. So it is assumed, or at least possible, that PAT 25 misidentified another departing or landing, we don't know, airplane for CRJ7. And here is a quotation. I think the chopper had AAL, Alpha Alpha Lima 3130 in sight, not realizing it was the incorrect runway. They did not find her to as much as attempt to either rise quickly. She T-boned the other plane, effectively cutting it in half. Could she have gone around it? Could she have gone over under it? We don't know, but she was where she wasn't supposed to be. She was supposed to be at 200 feet, not at 300 plus. It is also unknown if the crew or her could have seen the lights of the airplane from their place. It is apparently, so I'm told, and from my own experience in flying on those planes at night, those UH-60s and other helicopters, sometimes you see forever. You think you have the entire sky to yourself, in any direction. I mean, it's almost hard to hit a plane like that. You actually, if you tried, you'd probably miss. It's almost like trying to intercept a missile. It's in three space. There's a lot of ways to miss yourself. So for that to happen, but then again, we're talking about the congested, probably the single most congested air corridor in the world, if you know what you look for. And so to do that at night and not have any instruments at play, FR rules, from my experience as a passenger, talking to the pilot and spending hours and hours on those aircraft and rather unpleasant conditions. Yeah, it's hard to know what you're looking at. So these are all things that general spatial disorientation, all these things factor into this. Apparently she only had, 500 or fewer flight hours. That's not that much. Like the Army helicopter pilots I know, or even jet fighters, they all have thousands of hours and they have combat experience. And, whether she was supposed to be flying that thing at night at all, certainly in this kind of dangerous, congested area, that's definitely a subject, point of contention. According to some other pilots whom I've heard on various YouTube channels and so forth, she may not have been fully qualified, at least not for this job, not for that mission at that time in this, location. So, where am I going with all of this? Was this really a DEA hire? While I can't state that as indisputable fact, it would so appear that it at least played some kind of role. And we all know, and I certainly know, and I've seen it, and I know hundreds of the people that I've worked with have told me stories, anecdotal evidence for sure, but it's hundreds of them, not just a few. And when I see commonalities, stories that keep repeating over and over again. Well, I was applying for this job, but I didn't get it. I was qualified. I had 1,000 hours or 2,000 hours at the yoke of this plane, that helicopter, blah blah blah. But somebody else got hired because she was a woman, she was black. It's like just saying again, all anecdotal. But you got to admit, it kind of looks like a duck, it quacks like a duck. It may just be a duck. And we all know that the FAA, and this is definitely an undisputed fact, the FAA has been turning away qualified men for years, all the way down to their own head of the FAA, who really came from Denver Airport, knows very little about how airports and such systems work in the real world. And, again, I'm not saying it's wrong to hire women or it's wrong to hire black people. It's wrong to hire... By the way, we have a lot of black men in our programs, just saying. So, no, I'm not coming from that. I'm not a racist. I'm not a sexist. I don't care. I'm just not interested in that kind of bullshit. I am interested in hiring especially in life-critical jobs like this, the most qualified human being. Man, woman, I don't care if they're from Mars, as long as they're loyal, they don't betray the Constitution, and they're qualified for the job. Go ahead. I don't care if you're green and 3 feet tall and you have bug eyes this big. Great. Aliens in the Army. Wonderful. I don't care. I don't give two flying you-know-whats about any of that. What I do care about is, and if a woman, a lesbian woman happens to be more qualified than any white guy in sight, I'm all for it. I care about hiring the most qualified person, whatever their sex or gender or sexual orientation or religious orientation or color of their skin is. I don't care, as long as they can do the job and they can do it properly without putting other people in danger or making them die. So to me, the real problem is this quota system. DEI means die, and there's examples for this. I remember I used to live in Miami, and there was maybe a decade ago, this pedestrian bridge collapsed. It was a massive construction. I mean, you never thought that a pedestrian bridge could be this big. It killed 12 people. It crushed a bunch of cars, and it was built by an architectural engineering bureau that prided themselves that they're all women and they're all lesbian or some such thing. None of that should enter the discussion. But I think you as a man probably know how men have been horribly maligned for years and decades, and the key word is misandry. Now, we've all heard about misogynist, like Hillary Clinton was saying, racist, sexist, misogynist, you name it. Well, the equivalent, the corollary term for being anti-male is called misandry. It kind of rhymes with misery. It's really bad things. So what happens when you do hire DEI instead of merit? Well, that would be, you die, If that's your primary qualification, why should that be even that important? In the 70s, this was called affirmative action. It was a bullshit concept then. And everybody's walking on eggshells. And I remember living in California and LA, and people told me, you're so politically incorrect, but, I don't think I can be your friend. Okay, soy boy. Okay, lip turd. Okay, fine. Because nobody is allowed to offend anyone. Everybody has to be polite. Well, if you want to be polite, go to Canada. That's where people are really polite. I'm not polite. I don't care if I commit a microaggression. Did you know, mathematically speaking, by the way, that technically a microaggression, now milliaggression, that would be 1,000th of an aggression. A microaggression is by definition, mathematically speaking, a millionth of an aggression. So that means I have to commit 1 million microaggressions to actually have committed an actual full-size aggression. Problem is also, competent people have to clean up after the DEI hires, This is like, look at the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, has to go in there and fish these dead bodies. And I know what I'm talking about here because my roommate in college here in St. Petersburg was actually the dive master that in 1980, a tanker, arguably not a DEI hire, but a tanker hit the Skyway Bridge, the old Skyway Bridge here, which was only 165 feet tall. It hit it, and a Greyhound bus with 35 people went down and everybody died. And my roommate in college was a dive. I was on the same rescue team as he was. We worked with the Coast Guard. But he was a dive master, which I'm terrified of. But he intimated stories to me how he would be down there at, 30 feet, 40 feet, and there'd be this floating corpse that had been in the water for like 3 days, and they had to pull them in. So yeah, that's what happens, and those were not DEIers. So I've worked with a lot of very professional people. Warren Farrell wrote a book called The Myth of Male Power, and I highly encourage you to read that. Dr. Warren Farrell used to be the head of NOW, National Organization for Women. That was the original feminazi organization, and he used to be a rabid feminist until he said, well, do men really have white privilege, or do they have any kind of male privilege? If so, 100 years ago, men and women approximately lived the same duration, roughly 70 some odd years. Now women live 79 years, white women, and white men live 71 years on average. Black women live a little less than white women, but they still outlive white men, and black men live even shorter than white men for whatever reason. I'm not saying what the reason is, and I'm not 100% sure I know what the reason is, but it could be stress, or it could be that men, and this is what he argues in his book, men are typically in the 20 top, he calls death professions. Now, obviously, number one is the military. You join the Marines, well, you kill, you die. You can. I'm not saying you will die, but I'm saying, your chance is slightly elevated if you get deployed in a war zone or as a regular Army grunt. Men are expected to do that. And he's talking about how one of those 20 death professions is actually garbage collectors. And you can get hurt 6 ways from Sunday, to quote Chuck Schumer, when you're working those big trucks with compactors, trash compactors in the back and so forth, and people have been crushed by those things. Anyway, or being a roofer, being a highway patrol, or a cop, a fireman. These are all high-risk professions. And while there's always women and qualified women, there's also a lot, if you look at the Trump assassination attempt, number one, down there in Pennsylvania in July 2024. If you look at some of these Secret Service women, they're not even tall enough. And they're trying to shield people, but the point is, death profession. And it's expected of men put their lives on the line. I mean, if you work construction, if you work with front-end loaders, or, you're on the road crew, highway construction, if logger, I mean, people die all the time logging. I'm not laughing because I find it funny. It's just the ridiculousness that this is totally expected of men, but not of women. Okay, so qualified people are routinely disallowed, not allowed from getting hired, as DEI seems to be, and seems to very much be, the single most important criterion, qualification right now over quality people, over qualified people at this point. And that's an aberration. All the evil men, the white men, the straight men, white privilege. Now, if you're a white man, ask yourself, what's your white privilege? If you're a black man, tell me, what is your male privilege? Are you getting preferential treatment for being a man? My intuition is maybe not so much. So again, if I'm talking about white men here, please understand, I'm not partial to white men. I'm an equal opportunity despiser of stupid people. I don't care what color of your skin is if you're a dumbass. I don't care if you're blue, green, or checkered. I don't care if you're lilac and from Mars. I don't care. You're either qualified or you're a dumbass, okay? I don't discriminate on the basis of sex or religion, but again, white men, and to some extent, or maybe even greater extent, in many, many ways, black men seem to, just find their own type of glass ceiling, just saying. Okay, where am I really going with all this? Why am I even talking about this? Why should you care? Here's why. Because as a man, you may be qualified, you may not be qualified. Now, this is all about merit. And in the old days, we had the aristocracy. That meant, like, you were born into nobility, and voila, here we are. You're one of the chosen ones. You're already there. You get everything on a silver spoon. For the rest of us, we're not in that big club, like, as Carlin was saying. It's a big club, you ain't in it. If you're not part of that privileged club, it doesn't really matter what color you are. You're not part of that. If that's the criterion to weed you out, now I'm all about merit, and that means you need to be qualified. Now, if you've ever run into this kind of weird glass wall, glass ceiling, whatever you want to call it, just because you're a man or a white man or a straight man, or I don't care what kind of man you are, as long as you're a man, you're a man. And if you get booted, you're gonna get weeded out. You never get a fair chance because you're not the right sex or gender or color or religion or whatever, or sexual orientation. Then we have a problem. Then that leads to a gross distortion of the job market and of the qualifications we have. And I think we've seen more and more accidents. Look at all the Boeing stuff. Look at the whistleblowers, what they're saying about what goes on Boeing. And if you are a whistleblower, then you got to watch for your life, actually. Certainly for your career. Okay, for argument's sake, let's invert this for a minute here. If you were hearing me say, we should only hire white men, straight white men, then you didn't hear me. That's not what I'm saying. Definitely far from it. The only thing I'm saying is let the most qualified person, that person, I'm using that nondescript kind of stupid word, I hate that word, you're either a man or a woman, but let's say person, you're the most qualified person for the job, especially when it matters, when people die, when you don't get it done right, when you don't get it right, when people die. If you're one of those, applying for one of those, you should be hired based on merit and nothing else, on being the most qualified person for the job. Man, woman, Martian, I don't care. Gay, straight, lesbian, I don't care. As long as you're qualified to do that job, you should get that job. And the lesser qualified person should not get that job. As simple as that. That's all I'm saying. For you trans people out there, if you're trans and you're green and from Mars, but you're super qualified, you worked on yourself, you develop your skills, you have some talent, then you should get that job. Over a white man that's not qualified. Let me just make sure that we get this straight. So, that said, I'm all for empowering men. I'm not a man's movement kind of guy. All I'm doing is I'm against discriminating men. I'm against maligning men. I'm against misandry, just like I'm against misogyny. I'm against racism, sexism, or discrimination on any other basis. I'm just anti-discrimination, but I'm all for merit and qualifications. So if you're saying, well, I'm a white guy and I'm just blaming this on my, I'm in the victim role and, everybody else moves ahead of me and I should be getting that job. Well, not so fast. Are you qualified? Have you done the homework? Have you done the work? Have you worked on yourself? Have you made yourself the best possible man you can possibly be? If so, more power to you. You should get the job, whatever your chosen field of profession is. But if you aren't, based on merit, if you think you just should get it because you're a white dude, then go F yourself, okay? Let's just say it as it is. I'm not mincing words. I think you figured this out by now if you listen to some of the stuff I've been telling you. So, when I ask women, what is it, why can't you find a good guy? Well, they're all like, man children. They're all like boys in a man's body, okay? Can I be more specific? Well, they lack ambition. They really have no talent and they don't work on themselves. They're just in the same job for decade after decade. And, well, my ex-husband, he's sitting in his basement playing video games in his mom's basement or his own basement. I don't care. If you're 12, I think it's perfectly okay. Even 14, it's fine. If you sit in your mom's basement playing video games. It is not okay if you're 43 and you're still doing this 2 hours a day. Aside from the fact that it's a total waste of time, there's really nothing to be gained for your life. If you just want to be a dude, having a good life, a good wife, all that shit, good girlfriends, learn some skills, be qualified. I don't care if it's an air traffic controller or a carpenter. I don't care if it's a garbage collector or an astronaut. It doesn't matter to me. It shouldn't matter to, it's whatever you're naturally good at. Find a life's purpose, find something. So if you're just a dude sitting at home and wasting away your life, then you're not qualified. And then if there's some DEI hire, that's just based on merit, which is a contradiction in terms, great, okay? Just saying. So work on your skills. And what I always say, if you're just a dude that's sitting at home playing video games, lamenting your own fate, being sucked into the victim role, learn helplessness, and you're hiding from the world, you're hiding from women, and you feel like a failure or undesirable as a white dude or even as a black dude or whatever dude, then all I can say to you, I rise you to the challenges of being a man instead of letting this shit get to you, okay? If you aren't really trying, then, you got no one to blame but yourself. What's the use if I'm useless as a straight white male? Well, I built a business from nothing. I didn't have any, silver spoon in mouth. I had no government grants. I wasn't a DEI hire. I built a business from absolutely nothing. I was on the verge of homelessness 20 years ago, and I somehow kind of pulled myself up by my own bootstraps. I had no money. I had nothing. I had no one helping me. Everything was a really bad shit show, and I somehow made it. I started with $5 construction jobs. I worked my way up as a tour guide. I finally made some money, and in my spare time, I was writing workshops and contents and booklets and all kinds of stuff, products. And suddenly, I was lucky. I got my lucky break. Yeah, well, luck is opportunity meets preparedness. If you're not prepared, if you didn't plow your field and you didn't sow the seeds, there's nothing to reap but failure. So, if you're retreating from the world and from life and from dating and women, you might really look at your life, take a long, hard look. And this is what we do. We help men like you get out of that victim role, out of that trap, out of that learned helplessness, or that limiting belief that you can't make it just because, the world's, there's a conspiracy against white men. Yeah, maybe there is, but you still can make it. If you work on yourself, you become really qualified. You can overcome all that stuff. You may not even be aware of what you're doing, how you're hiding, how you're just, putting yourself down or engaging in self-pity. Therefore, I say, arise thyself, young man. Get a job, get skills, get something that you're good at, something you're passionate about, find your life's purpose. By the way, if you have no idea how to do that, this is what we do. This is what we're good at, okay? I'm not good at flying a plane. I'm not good at playing the piano, even though I try. I'm not good at a lot of shit, okay? But I'm really, really good at kicking your butt, waking yourself up. And it's not rah, 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 some kind of go, you can do it, action, like chaka, like Tony Robbins. I'm not doing that. I'm helping you to find what's right for you. I'm helping you, our team, come in for a consultation, come in for a coaching, come in for a free coaching call. These are not sales calls. We're not trying to sell you something. We're talking to you and just trying to figure out, get a sense of who you are. So if that's of any interest to you, if you want to learn how to escape all these mostly self-inflicted traps, or even externally inflicted traps such as DEI, quota system that works against you. If that's all that's stopping you, then you got your own limitations, okay? Limiting beliefs. And I'm not an NLP guy either when I say limiting beliefs. Anyway, if you want to find out how to do that, click on that link here below. Just talk to us. Talk to one of our coaches. They've talked to hundreds of men over the years. They can definitely help you. And then you can figure out for yourself if any of that is for you and what you can do, all right? Just saying. In that sense, my dear friend, we'll talk soon. We'll talk again. Don't be a victim. And don't let this DEI thing let your spirit die, okay? In that sense, so long. Ciao.